Well, we have three people here, and if you don't already know something about who these people are, I suspect that you've perhaps wandered in through the wrong door and maybe you're looking to be somewhere else.
When we put on the Albert Hall reading, Allen Ginsberg was actually staying with me at the time, and Hoppy took over the sort of publicity of the event and took some wonderful pictures, which are here of Allen outside the Albert Hall, and with Shakespeare listening in, and the ones of Ferlinghetti and all of those are all just from the press conference, in fact, just before the reading. At the reading itself, what really struck Hoppy and I most of all was the people. There was this huge building. People were turned away. I mean, there was 7,000 people there, and every single box had some kind of event going on. People had brought food and wine, and there were picnics going on. Some of the boxes, people just drew the curtains and never ever looked out. So who knows what went on in there. Afterwards, we were all very, very buoyed up about this and thought, this audience is fantastic, because here were people from the theatre, there were actors, there were students, there were painters, people who had little dress shops, basically all the elements of sort of youth, what became sort of youth culture in Britain. But there was no voice for them. There was a constituency there, but there was no way of communicating with each other. So what Hoppy and I wanted to do was start a London equivalent of the Village Voice in New York, which catered very much for the sort of downtown art scene and the music scene and all the rest of it. And we started off by doing a little a spoken word album. Actually, was the first thing. There was a reading by Wozniacki, Corso, Ginsberg, and who else? Can't remember. Ferlinghetti at the Architectural Association. So I taped that, and we released it as a spoken word record. And that was the first thing that Hoppy and I did as an actual publication. And that was published by a company that we'd set up called Love Books. And then we did a little anthology of sort of prose and poetry. I had some collages in it, because I was still basically trying to be an artist. Hoppy had some photographs. A guy called Lee Harwood had a poem, and William Burroughs provided a long cut-up text. So that was the first sort of print publication that we did. It was called Zarad, for some reason. And then we did a little more ambitiously. We followed up with a proper magazine called Long Hair. And we did this 80-page poetry magazine, and just literally had a whole bunch of friends over to help collate it and perfect bind it, and got it out. Then came a much more ambitious thing. We simply took all of my correspondence for about a week, which was like newsletters from people like Ed Sanders from the Fugs, and there was the Pump House Gang, whatever they were called, some surfers, sort of cool surfers out in California, who did a sort of newsletter about their experiments with drugs and so on. Letters from John Wilcox, who was involved with the founding of the Village Voice in New York. And somebody did a cartoon strip. Paul McCartney gave us some money to have a competition for an experimental film script. And we got it out in a week, and it was really kind of fun. And we just offset lithed the whole lot. I mean, facsimile, stapled it up, and took it onto the 1966 Aldermaston March, and sold it out. And on the strength of that, we thought there is definitely a need for this kind of magazine, but the only way to do it would be to do it properly with a proper editor and a staff. And clearly, Hoppy and I were not enough. So this is when Jim and Jack Moore and Michael Henshaw and all these other people came in, was at the very beginning of starting this magazine.
So I'm going to examine the background of the kind of sensibility that evolved through the rock and roll counterculture of the 60s, partly as represented by Katie, the protagonist of Groupie, and my own involvement in the whole scene. And I'm going to go back a bit in time, because I know in hindsight things look obvious. So it can now be seen how the 50s anticipated the coming of that fabled era known as the 60s. Elvis, James Dean, On the Road, The Beats, all these were a foretaste of things to come, and planted the seed of dissent in my mind that told me I could never be like my parents, who seemed locked in a stultified Victorian attitude to social and sexual relationships. Syd Barrett of Pink Floyd, with his fractured vision, fairyland melodies, and nursery rhyme nonsense, took me, as Crosby, Stills and Nash later put it, back to the garden. The summer of love came early for me, backstage in the corner of a scruffy dressing room at UFO, which was the first underground club and where I actually first met Hoppy. There was Syd, sitting in a corner, the archetypal doomed poet, wild-haired, pale-skinned, burning too bright and too hard, and I could see from his eyes he was already slipping away. To lie beside him and soothe his acid-fevered brow was my mission, and amazingly, I found myself in a position to do so. There was a short moment of time when the future rock gods were accessible, no stage door security, no corporate hospitality. They were just like the rest of us, embarking on a journey into the unknown. The girls screaming at the pre-acid Beatles had grown up, stopped screaming and started scheming. They wanted more than just an autograph. The fan was in the process of transmuting into the groupie. I just happened to arrive on the scene in that magic interlude. Sure enough, Syd slipped away, mentally and then physically, to another plane of existence. Ave Syd. But I'd got the taste. This was more than backstage. This was homage to the guys who moved my soul with their words and music. The sensory spectacle of the live performance was like a pagan ritual. Think of Arthur Brown and his voodoo screaming, "I am the god of hellfire," his flaming headdress and face daubed with melting black and white zigzags. The Floyd, who brought us the first music of acid consciousness, in their Thea Porter Eastern silks, playing long cosmic riffs, suffused by moving lights and effects that today might seem primitive, but then were the height of innovation, and which, complemented by the drugs we were most likely on, added to the out-of-body experience that the music was creating. Even the equipment had a powerful and mysterious appearance. Great dark banks of amps dotted with glowing buttons and vast speakers that pulsed with mind-blowing sound. I was reeling with happiness to find I had a soundtrack to my life that removed me from the straight grey world left over from the 50s, that conventional 9-to-5-ish world that disapproved of anything outside their own societal rules.
I'm in the bookshop business, and I acquired this bookshop, and this bookshop became a kind of a monument on the international trail, the trail from New York to San Francisco to London to Paris to Morocco to the bookshop. Somehow or another became a stopover, and everyone came there. And I date the beginning of the Traverse from the bookshop because I started doing productions in the bookshop. I had the Hit Festival production of 1960. We did David Hume's Dialogues Concerning Natural Religion, and at late at night, I think 10 o'clock at night. And after the performance, we served coffee to everyone, and then the discussion continued for another hour or so. And it was Harold Hobson, who was the dean of drama critics in Britain at the time, with Tynan snapping at his heels, but still Harold wrote a piece about 3/4 of his column and 80% of his columns about the production, and then mentioned that there were a few other things on at the festival as well that year. And we were, needless to say, could only hold about 60 people in the bookshop, and every night about 200 people wanted to come. You know, one contained a basement, which is which became the cinema. It also was the biggest bed in London as well. It was foam rubber, no seats, and it was tiered. And we had 16, Super 8, 16, 35, and video. We were the first video cinema in the world, thanks to my mad colleague, Jack Henry Moore. And like every Tuesday night, we had open screening night, and then we would screen anything that people brought us, whether it was home porn or travel, my trip in Ibiza or whatever, you know, we would screen it. And then on the ground floor of the main building, we had a gallery, which Pamela Zoline and Biddy Pippin ran. In the warehouse next to the main room, we had a theater. And the we had beer cases. I think they were Q and lager beers. I'm not sure, which we painted black, and they became the seats. So no one ever played. Everyone played always to a full house. There were never empty seats because when you bought your ticket, you also got your seat. So all audiences were full. Full houses. No matter whether it was 5 or 50, we were full. Which is psychologically good for actors to play to full houses, you know.